Welcome to the podcast of All Means All. In this episode, Nicola Ryan, Deirdre Forde, and Alison Stapleton will talk about Neuroinclusion, a school community approach.
This chapter draws on a participatory approach. It is a collaboration between neurodivergent and neurotypical professionals and advocates. We really felt that it's important to have an insider perspective as it adds to the authenticity of the chapter and will help to deepen understandings and empathy for neurodivergent children and youth.
So we thought that it might be helpful to start off with some general definitions, just because this topic can be relatively new for a lot of people. So as I'm given these definitions, I think it's important to remember that I'm not saying these are the correct ways to think and talk about these things, but rather this is how I understand them. And I think that there are good reasons to understand them in this way. So when I say neurodiversity, I'm talking about a biological fact. So it is a fact that all of our brains differ. And because of that fact, we have labels such as autism and ADHD. So those labels are a consequence of the fact that all of our brains differ. When we talk about neurodiversity, we tend to talk about it also as a paradigm. And in that paradigm, we would tend to understand it using 3 key points. So first, that neurodiversity is natural and valuable. And so this means that it is not something synthetically created, but rather something that just happens anyway. It's also valuable. So the fact that we are all different gives us a collective strength. The second piece that we would tend to identify is that no one way of being is superior. So no one brain, no one neurotype is better than another. And finally, we would tend to say that neurodiversity should be approached in similar ways to other EDI or equality, diversity and inclusion topics, such as race, such as gender. And that is a way we can meaningfully work with this topic. A final term that it seems really important to define just from the onset is neurodivergent. And so this term was coined by Kassian Asimasu. And what this term means is someone who has a brain that differs from what is considered normal. And so, for example, autism is a form of neurodivergence. If you are autistic, you are neurodivergent. And there are many other forms of neurodivergence too. Really importantly, what we're striving for is to be neurodiversity affirming and to be neuroinclusive. And so what that means is we're affirming that everyone is different. All our brains are different. Of course they are. But we really want to strive for neuroharmony, neuroinclusion, a space where everyone can coexist in peace.
So the neurodiverse paradigm views neurological differences as natural variations of the human brain, akin to diversity in race, ethnicity, or gender. It emphasises that conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and others are not deficits or disorders, but really they are part of the natural spectrum of human diversity. The medical model of disability, on the other hand, focuses on diagnosing, treating, curing, or attempting to fix neurological differences. It views these differences primarily as medical issues or deficits that need to be corrected. Another difference between the neurodiverse paradigm and the medical model is the emphasis on strengths and unique abilities of neurodiverse individuals. The neurodiverse paradigm advocates for recognising and nurturing the strengths within educational, professional and social contexts, whereas the medical model of disability tends to focus on the limitations and challenges associated with neurological differences, often highlighting what individuals cannot do rather than what they can do. The neurodiverse paradigm, like the social model of disability, stresses the importance of social and environmental factors in the experiences of neurodiverse individuals. It calls for creating inclusive environments that accommodate and celebrate neurological differences. And often the language reflects respect and acceptance, and it avoids pathologising terms or the deficit-based view of the medical model. Another difference as well between the neurodiverse paradigm and the medical model is that the neurodiverse paradigm promotes self-advocacy and empowerment of neurodiverse individuals, encouraging them to take an active role in shaping their lives and the policies that affect them. Whereas traditionally the medical model placed more authority in the hands of medical professionals and caregivers and educators, thus limiting the autonomy and self-advocacy of neurodivergent individuals.
So why is the neurodiversity movement necessary for neuroinclusion? So one of the things that we can think about is widely held myths that are often out there. These are visible within our sort of professionals or our professions such as education, social work, nursing, but also in the wider community as well. And we need to think about what assumptions are made in the absence of knowing the lived experience of neurodivergent individuals. So some examples of some myths that are held that can reinforce stereotypes and stigma include those with autism. So those with autism may not experience empathy, they may not be sociable, or they may have all people with autism may have intellectual disabilities. Some other examples of myths include those with ADHD can change their diet to help with their behaviours, etc. Those with tics or Tourette's syndrome all shout profanities or swear words and may be able to control their tics. So these are some examples of some of the myths that I'm discussing at the moment. And some of the reasons for that might include lack of access to accurate information. It may include widely held sort of views that are religious and they don't fit with the religious beliefs. It may be from a cultural perspective about the causes of things like autism, ADHD, etc. Some of the reasons for these widely held myths include some other reasons include, when we're thinking about our professionals, lack of training in this area as well, lack of experience and maybe working in inclusive environments with people with lived experience. And some of the things that can help with myths are dispelling some of these myths through our teaching of our future nurses, our future teachers and our future social workers, etc. So embedding that in our teaching and raising these examples and highlighting that these are incorrect and thinking about some of the reasons for that as well. Further training also is really important to get accurate information.
So neurodivergent children are at higher risk of being bullied and socially isolated due to their differences in behaviour, communication and social interaction. This can lead to increased anxiety, depression and disengagement from school. And therefore, neurodivergent children may exhibit behaviours that are misunderstood or disruptive or defiant. And really, rather than think of them as behaviours, maybe think of them in ways that children act. So without proper understanding, these behaviours can lead to frequent disciplinary actions rather than appropriate supports. So exactly what Nicola said, we really need to ensure that teachers are trained in terms of neuroaffirmative approaches, and so that these children are not misunderstood on a daily basis within their classrooms. Many neurodivergent children experience sensory processing difficulties, making the typical classroom environment overwhelming. Issues such as noise, lighting and crowded spaces can be highly distressing and impede their ability to focus on and learn effectively. So the neurodiverse paradigm lends itself to more inclusive learning environments as it does not emphasise normalisation or adaptation of the individual to fit into existing structures.
So I'm multiply neurodivergent and parts of my neurotype were identified when I was a child and some other parts were only identified in my early 20s. And there were times during my school career where I was responded to in ways that were really affirming of my neurotype. And there were other times where I weren't. And one of the times where I was responded to in a really affirming way, I'll try to keep identities secure and safe, but I had this teacher who was working with me on something called Ashter. So in Ireland, Ashter is a way to practice vocab words through drama. And so this teacher had a phone, a toy phone in front of me and a baby doll, and had asked that I would phone the doctor for the sick baby. And so little me was like, that's a doll, and also the phone is not plugged in. And I really, looking back now, appreciate the way that the teacher responded to me. So it wasn't that you must play pretend, Alison, that's what we're doing. Instead, it was like, okay, the purpose of this activity is so that you can show me you know your words for this task. And I was like, oh, I can show you I know the words, no problem. And then I was able to engage in the task in a way that was authentic for me. And it wasn't just, well, now I have to play pretend because teacher said so. And so that was a really affirming way for me to be responded to. And even now, I think really fondly of that teacher. And then kind of on the other side, later in my school career, I had a particular project that I was working on for a class, and I was feeling frustrated and upset because I was putting lots of time in, and the teacher never seemed happy with what I was doing. So naturally, I would ask lots of questions. And I can see now how that might have felt confronting for teacher. But for me, it was just, oh, I want to do this thing really well for you. Please help me understand how to do that. Teacher had kind of gone behind my back and said to other students, oh, Alison is so sensitive, she needs to cop on. And cop on in Ireland would mean like, toughen up or be more realistic, or you're too sensitive. It's that kind of meaning. And I was so upset by that. And even talking about it now, I feel upset. And I also notice my mind is kind of like, wow, it doesn't even sound that serious. But it was, because across my life, that was how I was responded to. And how different would things have been if it was always that affirming response? And so even though my experiences are why I am the way that I am, I think it would be nice if more people had that kind of affirming approach to working with neurodivergent people. And even another example kind of later, again, in my academic career, when I had started to disclose my neurotype, so tell people that I was neurodivergent, sometimes I would be met with comments like, oh, but you're so good at perspective taking. And I can understand the intention there is to try to be nice, but all I'm hearing is that, like, my neurotype shouldn't be good at perspective taking, and that's not something that I should be good at. And so it feels like a microaggression. And so my hope is that things like that do start to change as we get closer towards more neuroaffirming and neuroinclusive practices.
So after listening to Alison's insider perspective, I think it's a really strong example that highlights how neurodivergent children can be understood in schools, and it highlights how much we need to be careful in what we say and how we interact with neurodivergent children. So we really need to ensure that we provide comprehensive training for trainee teachers. So as a lecturer in Maynooth University, I have worked in co-participatory ways with neurodivergent students in the initial teacher education programme. We have created modules which are more neuroaffirmative. And in that way, I think it helps to ensure that we have teachers who can empathise with neurodivergent children in classrooms, because they have greater understanding, acceptance and awareness of the differences that neurodivergent children have, or the way they experience the world differently. And I think this very much helps to create an ecosystem across schools, because if our teachers have greater acceptance, understanding and awareness, well then the people that they interact with as well will have greater acceptance, awareness and understanding. So I think very much looking at maybe Bronfenbrenner's approach, it helps to create a ripple effect. And we would like to see this ripple effect in the community as well, which I will talk about later on in the video.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience from a sort of healthcare clinician perspective, as well as my teaching as well in higher education. And I think similarly to Deirdre as well, we need to think about how we use more sort of neuroaffirmative language in our teaching as well. If I was to give an example of my teaching with student mental health nurses, although I do a little bit of teaching in the School of Social Work, Paramedic Science, etc., I think it's still an area of development, really, when to sort of teach about that understanding of differences in people that they may or they will be working with when they qualify. So it's really important. And if I can think about or draw on a model that we use, which is the biopsychosocial perspective, this encompasses the interchange or the factors that contribute to child development, if you like. So looking at the biological perspective, as Deirdre talked about earlier when we were thinking about the medical model, but also thinking about the individual experience, psychological, as well as the environmental and social factors. So I think that's really important moving forward in how we teach our students to think about the interplay of all of those factors and not, being siloed by particular models, if you like. And if I was to think about the ecology around the student as well and the different levels of systems, drawing on my own experience as well and how we work together with other professionals, I can recall in my sort of clinical experience days that I would work very closely with social workers, schools, safeguarding teams, etc. And some examples of perhaps some good practice as well might be where we would get together, and it was called the Team Around the Child, and there'd be lots of different professionals. So that encourages you not to use the terminology that you've been trained in and use more, sort of respectful neuroaffirmative language, and sharing that can help create this environment. And I think equally in our work that we do, often when in healthcare we would see children and young people who come for assessments, and it's really important the language that is used in those assessments, and we're sharing these assessments with our colleagues in education, social work, etc., to reinforce that neuroaffirming language as well. So it's really important to do that. And some other examples I can think about in creating a more sort of neurodivergent friendly ecosystem is the multi-professional training that we have and the sharing of good practice in this area as well, so that we've got an idea of what other people are doing and we're getting more of a shared understanding of what's happening out there. And also the co-delivery of training with people with lived experience, I think, is also quite a good example as well.
Across the level of the community, there are lots of ways in which we can ensure a community is neuroaffirmative. So just to give a small example, Maynooth would have won the Autism Friendly Towns initiative in Ireland in 2024. And this was due to a collaboration between parents, professionals, companies, the university. And we really looked at, if you think about school, actually, school ends at 3:00. So it's really important that we have neuroaffirmative environments for neurodivergent individuals in the community. So as part of this initiative, we trained business managers across the community, and we had autism-friendly evenings. And these evenings meant that parents could come into the community with their children and feel more comfortable because the noises were minimised, the lights were reduced, and the risk of children maybe having a meltdown because of sensory processing was reduced. Also, as part of this initiative, the university set up sensory spaces for students across the university so that they could maybe escape really busy environments during the day and relax and be themselves and prepare themselves for going back out into that busy environment again. So there was really a lovely collaboration across the whole community, between professionals, between corporate companies, businesses, parents, children. It was really lovely. So I think that's just a small example about what is possible for every community if we really want to ensure that we have neuroaffirmative communities.
So something else that we know from the literature is that oftentimes neurodivergent people will be judged more harshly than their neurotypical peers. And yet at the same time, something else we know from the literature is that neurodivergent to neurodivergent communication is just as effective as neurotypical to neurotypical communication. And so one way we might approach understanding this is through Damien Milton's double empathy problem. So it's the idea that when people are members of two different groups, they will always find it relatively more difficult to understand and empathise with each other because of their different group membership. And this different group membership actually creates an empathy gap. And so if we want to understand each other, you will have to cross that empathy gap. And oftentimes neurodivergent people are fully expected to cross that empathy gap and meet neurotypical people where they're at, rather than the other way around. And I'm not saying it has to be equal, but it cannot be the case that we are always asking or mandating that neurodivergent people fully and completely cross that empathy gap. And so that's really important to think about how we might impact our ecosystem, because that could happen at all various different levels. And if we see that change transforming down towards the child, surely it can come back out as well. A child starts to understand that they are different, not broken. They just have a different way of approaching these things. And seeing that change then reflected back out in how a child advocates for themselves, conceptualizes their own experience, and even invites others to experience their world in their way.
This chapter on neuroinclusion from a school community perspective aims to enable the school community to build a holistic and inclusive educational environment that acknowledges and celebrates neurological diversity. By fostering an inclusive culture that embraces sensory-friendly environments, promotes social inclusion, and encourages collaboration between teacher, educators, parents, and students, the chapter aspires to help to create school communities where every student, including neurodivergent students, are valued and where their differences are celebrated. It aims to transform schools into spaces that not only accommodate but actively affirm the unique strengths and potential of neurodivergent individuals, laying the groundwork for their success both academically and socially.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of All Means All. In the show notes, there is a link to the chapter in the open textbook. There you can find the transcript of the video and more information on the topic.